Hey, buddy. Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Just Two Dads. I'm Brian Altunian, and with me, as always, my partner, my friend, my colleague, partner in power, Mr. Shawn Francis. How are you today, buddy?
I am doing great. How about yourself?
I'm good.
Good.
I'm good. I'm
Good.
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 I'm
Good.
good. I'm seeing a little bit of a delay because it wouldn't be a normal episode if we did have some sort of technology.
If we didn't have a technical issue, yeah. Okay. Hmm.
Yeah. So we're gonna play this hesitation game. So for those of you who are listening, first of all, we don't have a guest today. We've got a great topic that we're going to be talking about, but we'd love it if you would subscribe to our YouTube channel. We do these live on Wednesdays. I don't know what day it is. On Wednesdays at 2:00 p.m. Pacific time, and it gets broadcast live on Facebook Live. And then it's broadcast also out to our YouTube channel. So we'd love to have you subscribe there. Also to Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify. So share if you like the subject matter that we're talking about. Please share that with your friends. Like it, comment, ask us a question. I don't know, at some point I think we're going to put our email addresses up here. We have a Just Two Dads email address as well. It's wearejusttwodads@gmail.com. Pretty simple. Thank you, Google, for letting us do that. We are Just Two Dads. So send us a note, a comment. I put something up this morning on social media, and I've got a couple people that said, hey, I'd love to be on your show. So it gives us opportunity for us to talk to more guests and share more information, but also to handle subject matters that may be important to you that we're not covering. We'd love to be able to be engaging with you as much as possible. We started out doing this content as a conversation between the two of us, and it has really evolved based on our friends, folks like Robert Moorhead, who follow us on a weekly basis and are close friends, and I don't say fans, but close friends and fans of the show. So thank you. We hope to expand our network considerably. So hope that you will share this among your friends. Shawn, welcome, buddy. How are you today?
I'm doing great. What's a little different is our show today is, I've embarked on this project. It makes it sound bigger than it is. It's simpler in task, but bigger in meaning, which I refer to as the vulnerability project. So I just figured for 30 days, I'm going to post on social media one thing that I'm vulnerable about. And the first 2 days, it was kind of like, here's what I feel about so-and-so. And you go ahead and you break down barriers and let your feelings be known about certain things. And in some areas, it relates to being a dad to a child with special needs. In some cases, it's just things generally speaking in life. I wanted to make sure that I wasn't venting, because there's enough people that are like, oh my gosh, I stubbed my toe. Oh my gosh, I stubbed my other toe. Oh my gosh, this week I broke the ankle on the same foot. And I don't want to be that person. I don't think I should tell you that I stubbed my toe unless I can let you know what I learned from it or how I came through the other side. And we're now at day 28. And the closer we get to day 30, I'm posting later and later in the day, because I'm thinking, what can I post that I haven't talked about before? And then, to be honest, there are certain days where I'm like, do I want to share that one? I don't know. And then there are a couple of them where I said I wasn't going to, and I was like, people need to be reminded that I'm, we all are alike. So I'm going to go ahead and post it. So I did that. And so I thought that, as we discussed, we would talk here about today about just that, the power of vulnerability. And then it made me stop and think, based on conversations that I've had with people, and Robert was actually one of them, our weekly viewer and my childhood friend, which is that, what, as much as we think that we're clear on what the show is about, when you hear Just Two Dads, you don't realize that it's deeper than that. It's supposed to be a show which we decided we're going to talk about a dad's perspective with regard to being a father to a child with special needs. But then it brings about the very notion, how existent are special needs? Because the truth of the matter is, all human beings have the same needs. So the question comes about, is there really such a thing as special needs, or do we simply have all the, this all have the same needs, but those with a disability or caring for, loving someone that has a disability need those same things, just more of it, or maybe in a different way. But at the end of the day, we get so specialized that we forget that in more ways than not, we are alike. And now more than ever, especially in this great country of ours, we need to come up with reasons to show each other why we are exactly the same while celebrating the things that make us unique. Because that's what we forget, that regardless of what your faith, even if you're an atheist, I think you have to acknowledge that each person is completely unique and gifted, and nobody will ever be as good as being at being you as you are, if you decide to be yourself when you find out, who you are, so to speak. But that's a whole nother conversation. But anyway, that's where we are today, and I think there's a lot of that people can relate to. Whether they're watching us here today on Facebook, or they're listening on the audio podcast.
Right. So here's a couple things for you. So give us a couple of examples of things that you posted and some profound learning that you got from that.
Well,
can you give us a couple?
I can give you. Well, I can think of one off the top of my head. The others, I have to. I'm sure the one that's on my mind right now, because it's always at the forefront. And people are either going to be like, "Oh my gosh, that's so profound," or they're going to go, "Oh my gosh, his skull is thick." One of the two. But you're talking about vulnerability. The idea and the value of being present also is so profound. So when Elijah was diagnosed, and since then, my wife and I have had conversations, and I've had some with myself, where it's always like, there's some hereditary piece to autism. So does that come from me and any of the challenges that I had? Because I was never diagnosed with anything, but my parents, I had enough reason to think that I was like special or something like that growing up, because I had tutors, I had all kind of evaluators and everything. And I don't know if you remember this movie from the late 70s called The Fury with oh my gosh, what is Michael Douglas's dad's name? Kirk Douglas, right? And Andrew Stevens. And he was gifted, and he had this telekinetic power and all this kind of stuff, and everybody wanted him for his gift and everything. Well, I don't know if it was me trying to psych myself up as to why I got bad grades or whatever, but I felt special because we had tutors that came to the house. I had tutors that were my actual teachers who spent extra time with me. I went to their house, all kinds of stuff. I was familiar with summer school. And it came down to the fact that no matter how physically present I was in a classroom, because I had a great attendance record, I was always mentally someplace else, daydreaming. I was so bored with school. And so they tried to figure out, what is it that makes it so difficult? And from a conversational standpoint, my dad would say, you're smart as anybody I've ever known. And when I get good grades, he would say, these grades that you've gotten, that your brother gets, because my brother, went on to Berkeley, all this kind of stuff. And he would say, these grades that your brother has gotten, he had to break his back to get them. And he's willing to do that. You could get those things in your sleep. And my brother was not slighted in any way. He would say, that's true. And so I'm saying all that to say, this is my long-winded answer, that I'm very easily distracted. And maybe my attempt to answer that is an example of it. But I'm easily distracted, because the gap between my brain and my mouth are like, my mouth is like to my mind, like, will you slow down for a minute and give me a minute to catch up? Because it's always on. And from when we discuss ideas and everything, I'm talking about one. Before I know it, there's 2 or 3 more that come about, whether it's a great idea or a horrible one. And so anyway, The idea of being present is something that I was vulnerable about on one of the first posts. And it comes from, anyone that looks at my profile will see that my family is very important to me. I consider myself to be a blessed individual. And my wife and I have a large blended family. As those that know my story or familiar with it know that we have 7 kids. Two daughters from my wife's previous marriage, our son Elijah, who is 14, diagnosed with autism at the age of 3, and then my wife's sister, her 4 children. So, we're pretty big and diverse, and there's a whole lot going on all the time, and I wouldn't have it any other way. And it paints a very big picture, and or a great picture, as us as this. I don't think anybody ever assumes that we're perfect and our relationships are perfect and stuff, but I'm conscious of making sure that I'm walking in a truth. I don't want to advertise anything that isn't so. So one of the things that is the truth is that doing this, personally developing, building a business and everything too, it is something that I want to make sure that that it's honest. And so we've had honest conversations about being present, because being easily distracted means that 1 minute you're working on the business and then another minute you're working on family, and so kind of scattering all over the place. So you might not be present in your moments with your family as much as possible. So that's been one of the things that I've been really, truly vulnerable about, and honest. And our foundation is great, which is why we have what we have. But it can always be better if there's an increased level of presence. And so that's one of the things that I got vulnerable about and chose to share.
Yeah, no, I think it's an amazing experience. Brave, courageous. I don't know if I would embark on it. I mean, I
Really?
do it privately. Like I do it privately. Like I feel like there are things I work on, but I mean, again, which is funny because there's certain things that I will do publicly that, some people don't want to do, but
right.
But what you're talking about, I think it makes a lot of sense for a lot of people. You're talking about things that impact entrepreneurs to some degree, right? So you call it, I don't know, distracted. We call it the squirrel. The squirrel.
Yeah, shiny
squirrel,
object. Take your pick. Yeah.
Shiny object. Yeah, but I would say, think about it. What you just described, juggling the business, your family, you just described every entrepreneur that around. And I think a lot of people who have worked for the more famous entrepreneurs, those, high profile entrepreneurs, would say that those folks all were probably diagnosed with something that we now term as special needs, some sort of delayed function or ADD, ADHD, autism. I mean, think about it. All of that, like Bill Gates, Zuckerberg to some degree, a lot of these folks, Bezos, Tony Hsieh had issues as well, right? So it's interesting to see that what you've just described is genius. And here's the other thing that I think, and you can tell me if this came up for you, but people who have what I would say would be maybe a deficiency in one area have high competency and proficiency in another area, right? We always know that folks who are have limitations with their sight, their hearing is highly profound, and those who can't hear, they have different senses and different sensations work to compensate.
Right.
And that's almost on the physical limitations. Did you find that in a way? I mean, really, honestly, Shawn, I'm blown away by your your willingness to do this vulnerability project so out in the open and so publicly, because you serve people and you have a family and so anyways, I'm commented after I asked you a question, which is silly. So go back to the question.
No, it's not. No, it's I needed it because it's nice to know in terms of real affirmation, because when people say things like, oh my gosh, that's inspirational, and and I appreciate that, and that means something to me. But then when you talk about like the bravery of it, I didn't necessarily see that, because I don't feel like, oh my gosh, this weight is lifted, I'm so glad I shared that. I don't, probably because I'm still choosy about what I post, and most people might not know it, but I'm a fairly private person. I mean, when you look at my social media, you see my family on there and everything like that. But if you don't look carefully and kind of look through that, you might think it's just me, because I'm the only one that's kind of like out there. But like for instance, I have a post of that I shot of the kids making kettle corn last week, and I got chased out of the kitchen because I was
Yeah.
interrupting the project and sampling the merchandise. But I consciously shot the footage from their neck down because I just walked in and started shooting it because I think like, and maybe it's a matter of taking Elijah for granted, but Elijah's on social in terms of my pictures, with him and everything. Our relationship is different because of what he needs and our time together. So there's more images of him and things like that. And he's not, if he didn't want his picture on there and he knew it was, he would be like, no, we're not taking a picture. He would say that. And he doesn't. Most of the other kids are kind of like, if we're posing for a family picture, that's one thing. But if I want to get on their nerves, I'll be like, hey, I'm going to take a picture. Or even if I honestly take a picture and it's candid, they'll be like, you're not going to post that, are you? So I'm saying that to say that it doesn't seem like as big of a reveal, to me. But when I sit back and I look at it, it is. But I did give thought to, okay, what am I going to be vulnerable about today? And then I want to make sure that, the direction is cool. Because especially from a special needs standpoint, when there's a special needs component to it, so to speak, I posted it on some of the groups that I belong to on Facebook. And some people have come back and said great things and in terms of thank yous. And then some other people have chimed in with kind of like, oh, I'm in the same boat, but I'm in this, and this is not to judge anyone, but rather than say I'm in the same boat, how are you doing? How are you finding your way out? There's kind of like, just like pretty much pull up a seat. Let's have a drink together and show no sorrows. I don't know why I just did Doc Brown from Back to the
That was
Future,
weird.
but
I don't know. That was weird. Yeah,
but that's kind of what I get from it, though. I have this vision of a guy on a bar stool who's like, off his rocker and hears that somebody else has a problem and puts his arm around him because misery loves company, and misery having company is okay if misery wants to involve happiness to the party. If misery wants to just have only misery at the party, then that's a problem.
Yeah, but let's talk about that because so there's a big difference, right? I think vulnerability, and the fact that men don't talk about things that they're vulnerable about, just in general,
Right.
I think we just shy away from that. But vulnerability, I think, there's so many factors to it, right? So vulnerability is tied to fear. Would you agree with that?
It is,
Right?
and
Things that we're vulnerable
I think
about.
accurately and inaccurately, because to be vulnerable is not to be vulnerable. To me, is to be brave in spite of I guess to act in spite of fear. I guess vulnerability doesn't have to
Like what?
necessarily
Like,
be
give me
tied
an
to fear.
example. What do you mean?
Well, people
Yeah.
will equate vulnerability with fear. Like, here's what I'm
No,
afraid
I know
of.
that side, but you're saying it's not. So give me an example of where. Yeah, but give me an example where
We're,
vulnerability is brave and not tied to fear, as an example.
well, I take that back because bravery is action is to act in spite of fear. So I take that back.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
So,
Right.
but I
Yeah.
think that when you're just,
Because
here's how I feel, I'm going to share this. It's vulnerable because you're opening yourself up to who knows what in terms of how somebody receives it, but it doesn't always have to necessarily involve fear. You can be vulnerable in terms of sharing something that brings you joy too. Or like, for instance, let's say you're, I don't know, some stereotypical macho, testosterone laden guy, or you're in a profession that is linked to that. And maybe you even go back in time a little bit. You're a football player, you're, I don't know, a bricklayer
I
or a
gotcha.
boxer,
I
whatever
gotcha.
have you. And you're going to
Sure.
talk about something that you just love, that within you doesn't threaten your existence, your masculinity, or anything like that. Maybe you like ballet, maybe you like classical. Who knows? People wouldn't think about that as being odd now, but in expressing that something that brings you joy, it's not usually associated with that. So that's being vulnerable by sharing something like that.
But in that example, the vulnerability is the fear of judgment of other people, right? From other people. The fear
That's true.
that you're doing
Depends on the
something in
person, yeah.
contrast with societal expectations, right? This is a High School Musical, right? The basketball star. This is I'm a dad of girls, right? That's why I'm going to quote High School Musical.
Right. Right.
I enjoyed the show. I enjoyed the movies as well. I'm just saying. But as a dad, but right, that's the basketball star who wants to sing, the football player who wants to dance. The the like. There's always that. But the vulnerability component, I still think I don't think that vulnerability exists without an aspect of fear of something. I think that how we then present and how we conquer that fear, that's where the bravery comes in, which is what you're talking about, which is taking an action in the face of fear, right? You're afraid of something and you take the action anyways without fear of consequence. And I think that that's the other case, right? Vulnerability is tied to consequence. So our fear of a consequence, right?
Yeah.
And so, right? Would you agree?
I think, I agree. I think you're right. I think what I'm doing. No, you go ahead. Go ahead.
I was gonna say so, and I'm not to shift it back to me, but one of the biggest fears that I think many people have, probably a very, very high percentage of people have, is a fear of public speaking. They'll know that, right? People would, I'd die of public speaking. Right. And part of it is because the vulnerability that exists in speaking in public is you don't want to be made, you don't want people to think that you're a fool. You don't want to be laughed at. You don't want to be all of those things that you're afraid of, public speaking, exposing some deficiency. And so people are afraid of, they don't want to look bad. They don't want to be laughed at. They don't want to be ridiculed. They don't want to be exposed. They don't want to say something that, put them in a bad position. So anyways, for me, I love public speaking. I flew in the face of that. Like for me, I went to the extreme, right? I did stand-up comedy because for me, first of all, I was a huge fan of the medium growing up. I could cite every Steve Martin gig. I could do every Jerry Seinfeld gig before Seinfeld had a show. Right. In the early days of Seinfeld, by the way, in the first season of Seinfeld, he did episodes where segments of the episode he was doing in front of a live and quote unquote live audience. And that was shot in the studio. Yeah, remember that? Right. That was shot in the studio where the show itself was shot. And they had a bunch of people in there sitting in the room. I actually sat in there with a friend of mine, and we sat in the audience. I'm air quoting for those who weren't on video, of the audience of his nightclub act. And he would stand on stage, and when the camera was on the audience and not on him, he'd say, "Hey, what do you want me to guys? What should I talk about?" And we were throwing out Seinfeld bits to him that he could talk about because we knew his stuff so well. So I was a big fan of stand-up comedy, and I thought, man, one day I'm going to go to an open mic and I'm just going to go get drunk, and that will give me the courage to go stand on stage, right? Which is, by the way, the dumbest thing in the world to do. Right. And so I did the more practical thing as well. Let me go take a class and figure out how to do this, and then go take it from somebody who teaches stand-up comedians how to do it. And and then I did it. And getting up on stage as a comedian is incredibly vulnerable because you're out there, you've got a set idea of things that you want to share, jokes that you want to tell, and you're in the middle. It's sort of like live action fear, right? What if they don't laugh? What if they boo? What if they heckle?
How old when you, and it's interesting that I'm thinking of this for the first time. How old was Jordan and her diagnosis and everything when was she even born when you ended up doing stand-up?
Yeah, no, it's a good question. She was about 8 years old.
Okay, here's my question, because for me, the vulnerability of dealing with the things that come with being the father to a child with special needs, the biggest part that comes about for me is like, oh my gosh, the big worry and what other people think and stuff like that is associated with being out and about and a meltdown of the worst kind or something like that. And so it translates then into everything I do in terms of my existence and myself. So for you, being vulnerable enough to get up there on stage and do stand-up, how did that correlate with any vulnerability you had with regard to fears or concerns as a child, as a parent to a child who was diagnosed with a disability? Or was that something that helped doing stand-up?
You know, God, it's so interesting. Me, the guy who's not, going to be vulnerable about anything publicly. So first of all,
I knew what I was doing there.
This audience, anybody who's watching this, yeah, you're the worst. Our audience knows that we have the ability to burst into tears at any moment, so nothing surprises anybody anymore with our audience. But I would say now by the time that this had happened, and Jordan was 8 years old, her mom and I were already divorced, and so there was a whole bunch of things that were involved in that. Right, there was a whole bunch of emotions and things that were happening. Upset. When I say upset, I don't mean anger upset. I mean upset of the foundation of my life. Yeah, balance. And so I think that there was a lot of imbalance. And so, in a way, without getting drunk, I was sort of drunk on imbalance, if you will. So getting up on stage and exposing myself, to an audience at a comedy club, really is kind of was right in there, right? Like throw me in it. So it's interesting because the challenges that her mom and I had in our relationship, and in caring for her as especially a child, and again, we had a second daughter, Gabby, who was very neurotypical and on the other side. So the challenges of dealing with our children who had different needs,
Right.
created some interesting imbalance for me at the time. And I think that going and doing the thing that I had wanted to do my whole life, that was sort of like, hey man, I might as well do it now. Do it now.
Mm-hmm.
All hell's broken loose anyways. Of my
Yeah.
picture of what fatherhood, parenthood, marriage, relationships, that's all been turned on its ear. So might as well just throw it out there. And so in a way, right, that was where I was already exposed to a bunch of, sort of raw elements. And so my being tuned into vulnerability was pretty heightened at that time, I think, right? So getting up on stage was nothing, right? What I was going through.
Yeah.
In fact, some of it became fodder for what I talked about,
I'm sure.
about relationships. I didn't really talk about, obviously, talk about kids, but yeah. So, but I think that people generally, when they fear, things like public speaking, and again, it goes back to some basic general fears, because you've spoken in front of groups of people, where once you do it, you realize all of our fears are made up, right? Completely man-made.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. There's always a combination of that. Things could happen. And speaking of which, you're talking about vulnerability. I had new parents tell me that this happened to them too. And I don't know if we've talked about this, but when Elijah was born, I'm talking pre-diagnosis, it didn't have anything to do with special needs or anything like that. It was just the idea that he was born. And I had cousins and things like that were babies that, I changed diapers and just always loved kids, and, love to smell and hold them. And it's like, they kind of like, they literally like give you life. They're a life source. So that's my experience, but I had not been a parent before. Like my wife Laura, her girls, we had a good relationship and everything when we started dating, but they weren't babies. So Elijah's a baby and he's mine and my first and everything. So I used to have these visions of things happening to him that are pretty close to impossible. I mean, I'm talking about being attacked by animals that aren't even in this country, like lions, unless you're at the zoo or something like that. Like I'm just
hyenas.
Yes, that's an inside joke. but I mean, literally, I would see them and just be like, what if an elephant came down the street and was like charging him? I mean, like just weird things that, and the things that make you so strong yet so very weak, because you're like, there's nothing I would not do for this individual. Will I ever have to do that? And so that's a piece of vulnerability. Then it carries over into all the other things in terms of what may happen. And stuff like that. And then we actually had instances that weren't tied to special needs because, one of the things that comes with autism is elopement. And he's not done that on a regular basis, but there's been 2 instances where he was small where that took place. And I have to watch changing gears or else the waterworks start there because he just went on his own. Had a conversation with a mom about a week and a half ago. Her son elopes, and his elopement is very deliberate and controlled. Not sneaking out a window or anything like that. Just like 2:00 in the morning, pajamas on, take a key, go out the door, and just walk down the street.
Oh my gosh!
And
oh my
in his case, we had 2 instances where. One where we had just moved into the house that we were living in at the time, kind of looking around. Where is he at? We already know enough to make sure that there's locks on certain doors and you can't reach some of them. But he wasn't anywhere around, and you're looking and the side gate to the backyard is open. So I'm retracing this, what I think might be the steps after I see the gate open, and I come out down the street. There's a major boulevard thoroughway. He's walking up that street with a guy, and the guy's holding his hand. And whenever I tell this story, it reminds me too of how we forget from where we come and the progress that we've made. So at this point, he's probably 5 at the most. He might be a little younger than that. And the guy's just saying, and anybody that's familiar with the area here in Los Angeles and the Valley and in Burbank will know this. The guy says to me, yeah, he was 2 lanes out on Glen Oaks. And when I convinced him to come towards me and everything, but he wouldn't tell me his name. And him to be able to tell you his name. He couldn't at that point. And that guy could have been anybody,
Anybody.
Anybody. And then we had one other instance where, something similar, had taken place where he was didn't know where he was, and I just happened to ask, hey, has anybody seen him? And I look over I'm standing in the fence. Something just tells me to stand still for a second and listen. I have no idea why, and I do. And as I do that, I hear like kind of like a struggle. I look over the fence, and he's in the neighbor's pool up to about maybe here. And for those that are looking at video, I'm like just above between my chest and my neck. The water is that deep.
Yeah.
And it's going up because he's going further into the deep end on his toes. And the time that passed between my realizing that and taking him out of that water was like a complete blur. And I happened to get him back over the fence or whatever, and he just has never done that since. And it's just a matter of, wandering, and the neighbor whose house it was, they had dogs, and they could have had bigger dogs that were like in the yard. They weren't, so he could have ran into trouble there. They were in the home, and the gentleman had been in the hospital for days before, so he came home and he was out cold. He didn't hear them barking up a storm. And so same, different but related subject, but that's why I feel like, from a faith standpoint, that I feel that we as a family are watched over, because if I wasn't home that day, I don't know what would have taken place. So you talk about a vulnerable moment. So that takes place. You get him in the shower and everything, and then as I sit there with my my legs all cut up from the fence and everything, I just shed what felt like 10 pounds in tears at that point, because I was just like, what if I was there, And so that's when you have the realistic minutes of what could happen to your child as well too, which then goes to the things that we talk about all the time in both our business and then as parents, which is what the heck happens when we leave this world in terms of what they're going to do, in terms of how independent they'll be and stuff like that. That's my greatest vulnerability right there.
Right. And so listen, we all come into this world, and we progress, with our own experiences, and we relate to one another. You and I started this because we have children who had, learning, in my case, learning disabilities, in your case, autism diagnosis and special needs issues.
Mm-hmm.
But what you just described, by the way, is a whole slew of people, and I'm not minimizing your experience at all, but a whole slew of people who are dealing with their parents who now have Alzheimer's. Those fears of walking out into the street and up a boulevard.
It almost seems like it's growing or something. And
Yeah.
and I don't know what the
Yeah.
stats are, but it must be. I have an aunt um, that just passed away, and that's something that my uncle went through, and I learned a bit from that. That's when we talk to people too, and I'm glad you just said that, because now that also directs me to something else we talked about covering today, which is people knowing, when we do our business presentations, people knowing what that is, but also people knowing what the show is. Sometimes people will stop and think, they hear special needs and they either think, oh, that doesn't apply to me. Or if there's one area of it
Right.
that it does apply to, they think about that only. Just like, for the truth of the matter is, for the longest time,
Right.
I associated it with autism only. But one, the autism experience is different for each person. And then the special needs experience is different too, because there's an aging population, as you said, where that's a real serious situation where people are robbed of their memories. And again, if you don't have the financial plans in place, which we help provide, that can be very costly. But then there's the emotional toll of it that almost nobody can prepare for. And you know what? At the ripe age of 56, I found myself thinking, like, you know what? I sure hope that my faculties are in a place where that burden doesn't fall upon um, anybody else, because time is the original gangster. It's not a rapper and it's not a gang member. Time is the original gangster because it cares not about anybody else, and it's not your friend, and it's going to keep rolling no matter what you do. So it goes by pretty fast. So that's another thought about vulnerability too. I mean, I'm healthy and everything, but those things are there.
Sure, sure. And I just, yeah, I think that you bring up a really good point, and something that, we want to address here too. A lot of our guests in the first several episodes, dealing with, autism as a primary area of care and focus. And, we've had some comments, we've had some conversations about the fact that, a cognitive limitation is one form of special need. Physical limitations are the same. We had Adam Hancock on as a guest, and I loved having Adam Hancock on because he's a member of the special needs community. As a as a late in life accident that occurred that rendered him paralyzed and in a wheelchair, and hasn't stopped him from succeeding in life, but it is another form of of a limitation. And so as we age and as we progress through our lives, those kinds of things happen: illness, accidents, these kinds of things. And my mother is dealing with, what I would say is early onset of Alzheimer's. She definitely has some cognitive issues now in her age, and she's young. Even though I'm 57 myself, but my mom's still in her late 70s, young to have cognitive issues at the severe rate that she has them. So the point that
Yeah.
you made, which was why is there so much of it, is there's a whole bunch of factors, and I don't think that they've completely finished studying it, but things like aluminum in our in our foods and other environmental things that have contributed to water and our food intake and around the world, has contributed to things that could lead to Alzheimer's. I think again that's still being studied. But the point is that the special needs issue that we talk about a lot, and the care that we have to make sure that people are just aware of what's available to them, is that at some point in your life you may encounter it, whether you have avoided it or evaded it,
Mm-hmm.
by the grace of God, to this point, doesn't mean that you're guaranteed to be clear of it for the rest of your life. You may have somebody in your family who is going to require additional care, additional, protection, something where they're going to require you to perform some additional need to take care of
Yeah.
them and make sure that they're honored. So anyways, I'm glad that we're just sort of talking about this in this conversation. And again, the idea of vulnerability is such a big thing because our, I think, listen, I'll share another little vulnerable thing. I had this conversation with one of our guests on this show who, I've very fond of, Susanna Peace Lavelle, who is a life coach for special needs families. And she and I were talking about some of the content that we're going to develop and we're going to put as bonus material on our podcast, is just having sort of general conversations. And I said to her that for me personally in this discussion, and this is going to sound, a little weird, but I kind of feel like a fraud, and I think that's, by the way, just in general, I think that people who feel that they're a fraud about anything that they're doing in life, right, where they're out of integrity in their life, that's a massive area of vulnerability. When
You're
I say
right.
I feel like a fraud, as it relates to this, to what we're talking about, you know, your life with Elijah and the intense amount of work that you and your amazing wife do and your family does to take care of him, it's much more intense than the work that I was doing with Jordan and with Jordan's mom. And Jordan's now 25, and she has surpassed all of our expectations and all of the
Mm-hmm.
prognoses. And she's just telling me there's a snowstorm back in upstate New York where she now lives, and she may not be able to drive to work tomorrow because of the snow, because she drives to
Yeah.
work, and so she'll have to stay home with her husband and her stepson, right? So she's living a life and has really, like I said, succeeded. So as a dad in the special needs community, I kind of feel like I'm sort of on the outskirts to some degree, because I haven't had the intent. Although I was going to say I haven't had the intense kind of focus that you have, and some other folks have. And Susanna's daughter is is autistic as well, and excuse me. So I haven't had some of that intense work that you have. In fact, if anything, if I've ever had a public display of a meltdown, it famously in my family, it was Gabby, my neurotypical child, who had a
Mm-hmm.
meltdown in a McDonald's once that was absolutely unbelievable and went on for
Yeah.
so much longer. It was kind of crazy. So, but I never had that, and I always feel like in this conversation, she was very generous in reminding me that the battles that we've taken on now 25 years. I have battle scars from the work that we were doing with Jordan and our
Right.
experience with Jordan. So I'm not without it,
Right.
but there are times when I feel like, I almost feel like I'm invading the space. I don't
Let
have it
me
the
let
way that
me
some you have.
let me offer you something then. You just mentioned how, you know, I have the stamp of approval on, my battle is deeper and greater and more current, and
Yeah.
therefore, I haven't,
I,
I
yeah.
figuratively have a limb missing where you got all four and all that kind of stuff. But there are parents who figuratively have none and haven't come back from the war, so to speak, or haven't survived it, meaning that maybe their marriage didn't last, or whatever. So everybody's level is different. So your um, value and what you bring and authenticity is no less real than my own. And it's funny because I don't know if you realize it as we're talking. It's funny because when you're Einstein says you can't solve a problem at the same level of consciousness at which it occurred, and it doesn't have to be a problem. It can also be just an observation. If you notice, I mentioned earlier in my posts, I want to make sure that I'm not selling anything that isn't real. And I think that way, period, because you don't want to be a fraud. But Laura keeps me on track with that also, because she's mentioned it maybe twice, maybe three times ever, but it stays with me, and I'm always like, how does
Yeah.
this look? I don't pray over everything I post, literally, like, dear God, I wish that, in a formal sense, but I have a prayer within, in that I hope that what I post here will uplift and inspire someone in some way, shape, or form. It's very intentional. And because it's that intentional, there are times where I'm like, is there a gap between what's really going on and this picture that's being posted here? And that's why, and that's part of the reason why I did the project, because, people need to know, people like to try to connect with people with, I don't know, a watch, a ring, a house, a car, a thing, a trophy wife, a suit, a something. People
Yeah.
don't connect with that. People desire that, but then you end up becoming one of those people that, as I mentioned, I heard Jim Carrey and other people speak of, which is, I wish everyone could achieve financial independence, maybe even a little bit of fame, so they would know that that's not everything. And so what happens is, what really connects people is what we have in common. And not just what we have in common in terms of our problems, but what do we have in common in terms of our solutions? What do we have in common in terms of our quest? And again, like you and I said before, the one thing that connects every last one of us, I don't care who you are, is you want to know that you matter. You want to know that you're seen, and you want to know that you're heard.
Yeah.
And
yeah,
the Vulnerability Project was born out of the desire to do that. And now, because another moment of vulnerability, I haven't posted this part of it, but I'm very conscious of, I'm like, how much seeing and hearing am I doing at home? You know, everybody's cool and we love each other. But there's times where I catch myself and I'm like, I didn't lock in with Elijah at this, you know, at a given moment. And how much of that am I giving to, how much of that am I giving to my wife as well? You know? So those are thoughts.
yeah, yeah. You've got muted, by the way. I don't know if you did that on purpose.
You know, I did, because you talk about transparency and vulnerability. I guess I could have left the mic on, but Elijah's got rounds that he
I
does
heard him
each
come
day.
in.
Yeah, and he leaves with Laura, so he wants to make sure that he walks in to say bye.
What are you muting for? That's what we're talking about. I love
you know
it.
what?
Hilarious.
Because now when we do presentations, I'm thinking that for some reason the word live in the corner of the screen has me like, this is live. This is different. But see, that's vulnerable too, though, because you're still trying to, how does this present? How does that, you know what I mean? So I always say, never underestimate the ability of a human being to do anything great, whether it's something great and wonderful, something great and evil, or something great and complicated, which is otherwise really simple.
But listen, to that point, you know, I think at the end of the day, as we look at those areas where we find ourselves vulnerable, there's an evolution of things that can occur, including one, just acknowledging and recognizing. Sometimes we do things just out of habit, and we're not even conscious of the vulnerability and the fear and the aspect of things. The second is that after you recognize it, right? After you recognize and acknowledge it, that you then do something about it, and you take some sort of, you know, either take some sort of action. Acknowledgement's a huge thing, but take some sort of action, whether you want to actively, you know, combat it or address it. You know, in the case as I went up and did stand up, that's, you know, that was a great thing. Like, I definitely put myself out there. The idea that people who walk around don't want to be seen as a, you know, as a fraud, or don't want to be, you know, don't want to incur the wrath of judgment from other folks. You know, you can live with that, and then this is crippling. But if you actually take some action and combat it, there's not only is there bravery involved in that, but there's such a significant breakthrough that can occur. There's so much value that can be gained when you do that. When you get, I will tell you, like, I never have an issue getting on camera live, you know, like in this kind of an instance, or stand up in a room. If I'm called up on stage to do something, I never have a fear of it, because I've conquered that fear. Like, I know what it's like to stand up there. I'll share one thing about that in just a second. But the idea that, you know, you can take something on and like what you have done, which is you've taken it on, you've addressed it, you talked about it, whether or not you've taken action in all of those areas. That's one of the things I was asking you about. But you know, that's the next step, right? First of all, you've got people to go, oh my God, I had that same fear. I'm not alone, which is a huge thing. You've exposed you know, other folk, giving the people the opportunity to look into themselves and see where they have, you know, potentially some limitation. But I think that, you know, there's a lot of value. When I did stand up, and I did it as a hobby. It wasn't like, you know, it wasn't like a major career. But I did it for like 3 years in Los Angeles, around local places. I took a class, you know, and so I was taking a guarded and sort of educated, you know, effort. It wasn't like I was just throwing myself up on stage to, you know, stand up there naked.
Studying the craft, yeah.
I took a class, right? I wanted to, studying the craft, and learned how to write a joke and blah blah blah. So when I got up on stage for the very first time in a it was a workshop. It was a workshop, and so everybody who came to see us were invited friends. So it was an easy audience, because everybody was there to support us, right? And so I killed, man. It was the best experience I ever had. I went up on stage, I did a whole set, 7 minutes, and I was like, and all the jokes landed. It was the most incredible thing. And I got off the stage thinking, I have found my calling. Like, this is it. I want to do this forever. This is amazing. And in fact, one of the guys who had experience, who had gone through this, said to me, hey, I'm doing a show on Friday. This was Tuesday. Come do this show on Friday with me, do a set, because we're open up a new dance club, and this will be kind of fun. And so I'm like, oh my God. And now I've been invited to do it again somewhere else, not in a workshop, like in front of a live audience. How awesome is this? And then I got up on stage and I did the exact same set. Now, here's the crazy thing about it. My mom, we talk about a lot. My mom came to my first set and thought it was awesome, right? And she says to my dad, who's incredibly judgmental and doesn't, never give you the whole, hey, you're doing a great kind of thing. He came to the second show. So my dad is not only at the second show, Mr. Judgmental with his arms crossed like this, but he's in the front row. And I go up on stage. And this was in like this massive outdoor area, which was outdoor, what was going to be a large dance club. And I do a set that I had just done. I already knew where the beats were, the points were. And Shawn, I didn't get a single laugh. Like, it was crickets. At one point, I looked up. I kind of did that thing where they tap the microphone, like, hello, is this thing on? Right? And I looked up and I'm like, are the lights off? Can you not see me? Because there's the fear that people have in going on stage of bombing. I bombed, right? And I was like, oh my God, I'm never going up on stage ever again, right? Because that's the next thing, right? And by the way, that same guy said to me, hey, listen, don't worry about it. There's an audience. They wanted to go dance. They weren't want to hear to see comedians. They didn't laugh at anybody. Don't worry about it. And then, and I'll finish this really quickly, because he said to me, come out and do this other set with me out in Barstow, which is for those who know Southern California, it's like it's the middle point between like LA and Vegas, and it's like the middle of nowhere.
Right.
Yeah, it's the middle of nowhere. And so and there were 200 people in the room, and I'm like, cool. How many minutes do you want me to do my 7-minute set? It's like, oh no, you're the opening act. You've got to do 15 minutes. So there's a couple of things that are problematic with that. Opening act, which means nobody has had anything to drink. They're sober and expect me to be funny. Second, it was 15 minutes. I've only been on stage twice within 1 week, and I've done 7 minutes of material, one of which my friends laughed at me, and these other group didn't laugh. So I have no idea if the material is any good or not, right? I don't know what I'm doing is even making any sense. And my father, by the way, who sat through the whole thing, was like, yeah, don't invite me to any more of those shows. That was a disaster, right? That was the thing. So that's in my head, right?
Right.
So I have to write 15 minutes of show. There's only 3 comedians in this show. I do 15 minutes. Somebody's doing a half hour, and then my good friend Gayla Johnson, who's a pro, did an hour set. I get up on stage, and the guy introduces me, and he says, "Hey, everybody, I want to welcome a newcomer to the stage. Don't give him a hard time. It's not his first time on stage. It's his second," which kind of in essence really was, right? My second time on stage, right? So I get a big laugh. They got a big laugh. The guy who introduces me gets a big laugh. And so I get on stage and I pull the microphone out and I put the microphone stand. Sorry that this is a long story. I'll shorten it. And I'm standing there and I'm like, thanks everybody. And this woman in the front row who did apparently get her drink grabs a cherry out of her drink. So what is she drinking? She's drinking a Shirley Temple. I don't know what she's drinking. She grabs a cherry out of her drink and she throws it at me and hits me in the chest. This is the 3rd time I've ever been in front of a crowd, Shawn.
Yeah.
I have killed it in front of my friends. I have bombed in front of complete strangers. And now this woman throws a thing at me. And I pick up the cherry and I think of a really quick witty joke and I say, didn't he tell you it's not my first time on stage, right? Like, it's a cherry, blah, blah, blah. And I throw it back at her. I've got a big laugh. And then I forgot my entire 15-minute set. I forgot all of my jokes.
So what'd you do?
I went blank, which is why people fear public speaking, right?
Yeah.
Because you're like, oh my God, I'm supposed to be here for 15 minutes. These people are relying on me. These 200 people paid. And I was like, oh my God, I don't even, and I said, what I did is I acknowledged the elephant in the room. I looked at her, I'm like, I didn't say it this nicely, but I said, see what you did? You messed me up. And I've totally forgotten everything that I was going to say, right? Like, thank you very much, like, for blowing my entire set. And somebody in the back of the room was like yelling, kind of like, like yelling jokes. I'm like, you've never seen me before. You don't know my set. Like, what are you doing? Like, And then it all came back to me. Like acknowledging the moment, like being in the moment and sort of like letting it swirl and just going like, I got to pull it out. I better figure it out.
Right.
But, you know, I crossed over, and I will tell you, it was the greatest experience ever. I got off that stage after 50 minutes to a resounding applause, which was amazing. The gal who did the 1 hour set after me, all she did was talk about the lady in the front row. She spent an hour berating the lady in the front row to the delight of the entire
Delight of
crowd,
everyone else.
where the woman actually she got the woman to stand up and slap herself across the face for making a fool. It was the most amazing experience I've ever had. So all that to say that I powered through. I got and after that, I killed it. I bombed. I lost my entire, like, I forgot everyone completely blank. What else is there in public speaking? What else is there to do? Right. Now it's like, now I'm going to add value. I'm going to be effective. And I did it for 3 years as it had so much fun that my mentor said to me, either you do this as a profession or quit, because you're too good to not do this real. And you can't just go around doing showcases. Like, do this or don't do it.
Right.
And I was a public company executive at the time, and so I quit. That was back in 2006. So all that to say, the vulnerability that we all go through, right? If you can, which is what I think that you've done here, right? You've done a great service in the last 30 days, not just for yourself, but for other people who are dealing with those areas of vulnerability where they're afraid of exposure, they're afraid of being, found out, they're afraid of being ridiculed, they're afraid of whatever, and so that they're not vulnerable, right? So I mean, they don't express their vulnerability because they don't want all that stuff to. Understanding it, identifying it, and then taking action and doing something to address it is so powerful. So powerful.
I just thought of two things. You were asking me, like, what areas have I, worked on? And because it's 30 days and a different topic, even though there might be a line of relation to each one, I've mastered none since day one, because I think it takes about 30 days to get past one of them. So I'm focusing on pieces at a time, and they're all a work in progress. Like the one I'm really trying to, work on, because it's a simple thing, is, for instance, being faithful to the process of a gratitude jar. For those that don't know what that is, you take a jar, the bigger the better, and each day you find whatever your spirit, whatever is your spirit's capacity. You write one thing that you're grateful for, and you write the date, and you write your name on it. If you can get your whole family to do it, that's great too. And you put it in the jar. If you can do 2 a day, that's even better. We had an event with Ariana Huffington, that was like a week and a half ago, and something about what she talked about in terms of gratitude made me say, I'm going to do 2 a day. So 1 in the morning, 1 at night. So you begin the day with gratitude, you end the day with gratitude. Now what happens is, as the jar fills up over time, you will have those days where you consciously or unconsciously will wonder, what do I have to be grateful for, when you're in the middle of feeling sorry for yourself? Because despite the fact that we're at the top of the food chain, human beings are the strangest ones on the planet. So those are things that we do. And you can always go back to the jar, pull something out, and not only read something that'll pick you up and remind you of what you have to be grateful for, but it's really amazing when you do that and you're like, oh my gosh, I don't even really remember that. Was I that grateful for it in the moment? How dare that take place? So that's one area. But the other thing that you've given me in terms of working through this entire thing is, as I get to day 30, because there are people that are reading it and commenting and appreciating it. There are other people that it's kind of getting by, like they're not necessarily commenting. They may like it at the very least, they're doing that. Some aren't saying anything. What I'm gonna do, and I hope that people will respond to it, will be to challenge people to do one of their own. And it doesn't have to be 30 days. Maybe they do 5 days. Maybe they do 3. Whatever there's, is the capacity that their spirit has. So that will be interesting to see. But that's one of the ways I'm going to try and go ahead and close it out too.
Nice. I like that. We could clearly talk about this now, forever, and we've hit our 1 hour time frame. So thank you for doing this. Thanks for giving me a chance to do my vulnerability publicly now that I've done that for
Sure.
for the day.
Sure. Most definitely.
We'll wrap up today's episode. We've got some great guests coming. You know, the holidays are coming. We really talked about what our schedule is going to be over the next couple of weeks, but we'll post on social media what we're going to do. I am grateful for a lot of things. So as we wrap up, let me just say this: I'm grateful to you by giving me the for the partnership and the freedom and the platform to be able to do what I love to do, which is talk to people and try to make a contribution and make a difference and bring value to people. So thank you. I am thankful to my family. I'm thankful to my daughter Jordan, who taught me how to be a real father, and to my other children who benefited from that. And I'm thankful for them as well, because they all added a new facet to my life. I'm thankful for our guests who have been on the show that have added amazing contributions to our lives. To Sean Hall, our technical producer, who supports us and keeps us. Well, I just say keeps us on time, but he keeps us sort of on top of things.
Yes.
I'm grateful to to God and the people in my life and for so many things. So I love it. And one thing I've learned, especially during this year, 2020, empathy and love is something that's so needed. And so I'm a huge fan of expressing empathy and love wherever you can to anybody that you encounter. So with that note, I'd say thank you, and thank you for being part of our show today, and leave it the rest to you, Shawn, to wrap this up.
Well, thank you very much as well. This is, the time always goes by fast. That's how you know we're having fun. And we don't have a guest on here today, so I'm going to close by asking the audience to think about it, and hopefully people will respond, put it in, the chat or on our page. But I'll close up by asking someone, give us one belief that you had, that you swore by and hung on to very dearly, that you now feel the opposite about, one that you thought would never change. Again, this is another angle at taking the path towards examining the things that we have in common and how much we can change and grow. I also want to go ahead and thank the women in my life, which is my amazing wife, Laura, and my mom. I would not be who I am, who I aspire to be without them. I'm thankful for everyone that takes the time to tune in. And again, in this time and season, we're talking about vulnerability. One of the things that I posted too is that we take for granted, especially those of us that have love around us, that during the holiday season, there are people for whom it's a very, very difficult time. There are people for whom they are facing a holiday season without a loved one, in some cases for the first time. When you add on top of that the pandemic, it is twice as important that my following words be heard, which I close the show with each week, which is that we must remember that there's somebody out there that needs to be heard, needs to be seen, needs to know that they matter, and needs to know that they're loved. So let us make sure that we do that and let somebody know that, because when we do that for others, we do it for ourselves. And so with that said, everybody have a fantastic week. We'll see you next week and keep you guys posted as to what else is to come, because we don't know what our season is and if we're going to take a hiatus or what the case might be, but we will keep you posted, and we appreciate you more than words can say.
I love you, buddy.
Love you too.
Fantastic
Thanks so much.
Stuff. Thanks, everybody. Thanks for being here.